October 14th, 1942, 6,000 meters above the Stalingrad front. Soviet Senior Lieutenant Viktor Golovachev pulls his Yak-1 into a desperate climb, chasing a Messerschmitt Bf-109G2 that's already 1,000 meters above him. The German fighter banks lazily, almost mockingly. Its pilot knows what Golovachev is learning the hard way. Up here, in the thin, frozen air at 20,000 feet, Soviet fighters are drowning. Golovachev's VK-105PF engine screams. The oil temperature gauge climbs into the red zone. At minus 40 degrees Celsius outside, his oil is somehow overheating. The engine oil, designed for lower altitudes, is cavitating, forming air bubbles that starve the bearings of lubrication. His engine is cooking itself to death while the autumn cold bites through his canopy. The Bf-109 dives. Golovachev tries to follow. His controls feel like they're moving through molasses. The Yak-1 shudders, wallows, refuses to respond. Below, his wingman, Junior Lieutenant Alexei Belov, tries the same climb. His engine seizes at 5,800 meters. Black smoke trails behind him as he limps back to base on a dying power plant. That morning, the 434th Fighter Aviation Regiment had launched 12 Yak-1s. By noon, 9 had returned with engine damage or failure. 0 German aircraft destroyed. 3 Soviet pilots dead. Major General Georgy Zakharov slams his fist on the operations table at the forward command post. The Messerschmitts own everything above 5,000 meters, he tells his staff. They climb above us, dive through us, and we cannot follow. We are fighting with one hand tied behind our backs. The statistics are devastating. In the past month, Soviet fighters have lost 847 aircraft over the Stalingrad sector, a kill ratio of 1.3.2 in favor of the Luftwaffe. Above 6,000 meters, the ratio becomes 1.7. At high altitude, the VVS might as well be flying coffins. The engineers at Yakovlev Design Bureau know the problem. The Klimov VK-105 engine was optimized for low-altitude combat, the kind of treetop fighting Soviet doctrine demanded. But the Germans won't fight there anymore. They've learned they stay high, where physics itself becomes their ally. What Major General Zakharov doesn't know, what nobody knows, is that 800 kilometers south, at a frozen airfield near Milarovo, a mechanic with a 6th grade education is about to solve the problem with a bucket, a thermometer, and an idea that will get him threatened with a firing squad. The problem isn't new. It's as old as the Yak-1 itself. When Alexander Sergeyevich Yakovlev designed the I-26 prototype in 1939, he made a deliberate choice. The VK-105 engine would be optimized for combat between 2,000 and 4,000 meters, the altitude where Soviet doctrine said air battles would be fought, close air support, ground attack, protecting Il-2 Sturmovix as they tore into German tank columns. The oil system reflected this philosophy. The MS-20 mineral oil used in the VK-105 had a viscosity rating perfect for temperatures between -5 and +40 Celsius. At low altitude, where the engine ran hot and the air was dense, it worked beautifully. But at 6,000 meters, the air temperature drops to -40 Celsius. The oil thickens. Simultaneously, the reduced air density means less cooling, causing localized hotspots in the engine. The result? Oil that's too thick in some parts of the engine and cavitating in others. The bearings get starved. Pistons seize. Entire engines fail. "We tried everything," recalled Ivan Kabanov, chief engineer of the 8th Air Army's Technical Service. Thinner oil grades. They leaked at low altitude. Heated oil reservoirs. Added weight and complexity. Preheating the engine longer before takeoff. The Germans just climbed higher while we sat on the ground. The Soviet answer had been to avoid high-altitude combat entirely. In 1941, this worked. German fighters would dive to engage, and Yaks could turn inside them at low altitude. But by 1942, Luftwaffe pilots had learned discipline. They stayed high, made slashing attacks, and climbed back to safety before Soviet fighters could react. It was like fighting ghosts, said Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Pokrishkin, who would become the second highest scoring Soviet ace of the war. We'd see them at 7,000 meters. We'd try to climb. By the time we reached 5,500 meters, our engines were screaming, our controls were sluggish, and the Messerschmitts would drop on us like hawks on mice. The engineering consensus was clear. The problem was unsolvable without a complete engine redesign. The Yakovlev Bureau proposed the Yak 7B with an upgraded oil system, 18 months away. The Lavochkin Bureau offered the LA-5 with the radial M82 engine, better at altitude, but still 6 months from frontline deployment. General Aviation Marshal Alexander Novikov sent urgent requests to Moscow. Without high-altitude capability, we will lose air superiority over Stalingrad. The stakes couldn't be higher. Every day, Luftwaffe fighters protected Ju-87 Stukas and He-111 bombers that pounded Soviet positions. Fighters that should have been intercepting bombers were instead limping back to base with failing engines. German bombers were getting through. Soviet casualties were mounting. At the Milerovo airfield, the 237th Fighter Aviation Regiment faced the same problem. They'd received 12 new Yak-1s in September. By October, they'd lost 9 to engine failures at altitude, 5 in combat, 4 to seizures during training flights. The regiment's chief mechanic, Captain Nikolai Volkov, filed report after report. The oil system cannot sustain high-altitude operations. Request immediate engineering support or alternative aircraft. The response from headquarters was always the same. No alternatives available. Make do with existing equipment. The younger mechanics were furious. "We send boys up to die in aircraft we know are broken," said Technical Sergeant Dmitry Yashin. But one mechanic said nothing. He just watched, thought, and waited. His name was Alexei Belov. He was 32 years old. Before the war, he'd been a tractor mechanic on a collective farm near Voronezh. He had no formal engineering education. His handwriting was barely legible. But he understood engines the way some men understand horses. Instinctively, intimately, completely. And he was about to commit what the engineering establishment would call heresy. Alexei Pavlovich Belov should never have been anywhere near a fighter aircraft. Born in 1910 in a village so small it didn't appear on maps, he'd left school at age 12 to work in his father's workshop. While other boys learned geometry, Alexei learned to diagnose a failing bearing by sound alone. While they studied chemistry, he learned which oils mixed and which separated. His formal education ended in 6th grade. His real education never stopped. By 1935, he was the best tractor mechanic in Voronezh Oblast. Farmers would travel 50 kilometers for him to diagnose problems that stumped factory-trained engineers. He could hear what an engine was thinking, one recalled. He'd put his hand on a tractor, close his eyes, and tell you exactly which valve was leaking. When the war came, Belov was drafted into the VVS Technical Service. The commissar who processed him saw mechanic on his work history and assigned him to aircraft maintenance. Belov had never seen an airplane up close. At Milerovo, the other mechanics treated him like a curiosity. Captain Volkov, who had graduated from the Zhukovsky Air Force Engineering Academy, initially dismissed him. "He holds his wrenches like a peasant," Volkov told his deputy. "He'll strip every bolt he touches." But Belov didn't strip bolts. He fixed aircraft that factory-trained mechanics had written off as unrepairable. He could diagnose engine problems from the color of exhaust smoke. He rebuilt carburetors by feel in complete darkness during night operations. Pilots began requesting that their aircraft be assigned to the farm boy. Still, he kept his place. He didn't argue with engineers. He didn't challenge technical directives. He did his job, listened, and learned. On October 19, 1942, Lieutenant Golovachev returned from a mission white-faced with rage. His engine had nearly seized at 5,900 meters while a Bf-109 circled casually above him. "I was a sitting duck," he shouted at Captain Volkov. "The bastard could have shot me down any time. He was playing with me." Volkov could only spread his hands helplessly. "The engine wasn't designed for that altitude, Comrade Lieutenant. There's nothing we can do." That night, Belov sat alone in the maintenance hangar. In front of him, a disassembled VK-105 engine, its bearings scored from oil starvation. He'd pulled 6 similar engines that week. The pattern was always the same: damage concentrated in the upper bearing assemblies, where oil pressure was lowest. He thought about tractor engines in winter. The old farmer's trick when starting a frozen diesel: drain the oil at night, warm it by the fire, pour it back in the morning. Warm oil flowed better. But aircraft engines ran hot. Adding preheated oil would make overheating worse at low altitude. Unless, what if the oil wasn't warmed before startup, but cooled during operation? What if the problem wasn't that the oil was too cold, but that it was the wrong temperature at the wrong time? Belov stood up, walked to the supply shed, and began gathering materials: a thermometer, a bucket, a length of copper tubing, and a small hand pump. By dawn, he'd built something that looked like a child's science project. It would save hundreds of lives. Act 4. The Secret Solution. 500 words. The modification was almost insultingly simple. Belov took a standard external oil reservoir, a sealed canister used for oil changes, and modified it with a hand pump and copper tubing. The tubing connected to the engine's oil intake line through a valve he machined from a damaged hydraulic fitting. Inside the reservoir, he mixed standard MS-20 oil with 15% aviation gasoline, avgas. The gasoline thinned the oil, reducing its viscosity. This allowed it to flow properly even at minus 40 Celsius, but gasoline is volatile, it evaporates. At low altitudes where the engine ran hot, the gasoline would burn off, leaving pure MS-20 oil. The oil would automatically adjust its viscosity based on operating temperature. On October 23, 1942, Belov presented his modification to Captain Volkov in the pre-dawn darkness. "This will allow the engine to sustain high-altitude operations," he said quietly. Volkov stared at the contraption. "You mixed gasoline into the oil." "Yes, Comrade Captain." "That is insane. Gasoline in the oil will destroy the engine's lubrication properties. The bearings will seize immediately." Volkov's voice rose. "This is exactly the kind of ignorant field modification that gets pilots killed. I've calculated the ratios. You have a 6th grade education. You don't calculate ratios. You strip bolts and change oil." Volkov's face was red. "Do you understand what would happen if I let you install this and the engine failed? They'd shoot me. Then they'd shoot you." Belov stood silent, holding his crude modification. "And more importantly," Volkov continued, "mixing fuel into oil violates every maintenance directive from the Yakovlev Bureau. It's probably illegal. It's definitely unauthorized. This conversation is over." Belov nodded and walked away. That night, he installed the modification anyway. On his own aircraft, the Yak-1 he personally maintained. He didn't tell Volkov. He didn't file paperwork. He just did it. The next morning, Lieutenant Golovachev happened to fly that particular aircraft. His mission: intercept German reconnaissance planes operating at 6,500 meters. At 6,000 meters, Golovachev's engine was still running smoothly. At 6,500 meters, higher than any Yak-1 had sustained before, the engine purred. The oil temperature sat in the green zone. The controls responded crisply. Golovachev caught a Bf-109G2 by surprise at 6,400 meters and shot it down. He returned to base stunned, convinced his aircraft had been equipped with some new engine. "Whatever you did to that machine," he told the ground crew, "do it to all of them." Captain Volkov conducted an inspection. When he discovered Belov's unauthorized modification, he was faced with an impossible choice. The modification was illegal. It was also working. "You disobeyed a direct order," Volkov said. "Yes, Comrade Captain." "You installed an unauthorized modification." "Yes, Comrade Captain." "And you just proved that a farm boy with a bucket knows more about engines than the entire Yakovlev Design Bureau." Volkov looked at the modified aircraft, then at Belov, then at the sky where German fighters circled with impunity. "Show me how to install it," he said finally, "on every aircraft we have. And may God help us both if this goes wrong." Word spread fast. By October 26th, the entire 237th Fighter Aviation Regiment had been modified. Pilots reported sustained operations above 6,500 meters with no engine failures. On October 28th, a flight of 4 Yak-1s engaged 6 Bf-109s at 6,800 meters and shot down 2 without loss, the first time Soviet fighters had achieved a positive kill ratio above 6,000 meters in 3 months. Major General Zakharov heard about it. On November 2nd, he arrived at Milarovo unannounced with a team of engineers from the 8th Air Army Technical Directorate. Captain Volkov met him on the flight line, already sweating despite the November cold. "Comrade General, I can explain." "Explain later. Show me now." Belov demonstrated the modification. The engineers took notes, asked questions, examined the modified oil system with increasing incredulity. "This is completely unorthodox," said Major Konstantin Petrov, Chief Technical Officer of the 8th Air Army. "There are no specifications, no testing protocols, no approval from the Yakovlev Bureau. Does it work?" Zakharov interrupted. "The field results suggest..." "Does it work?" Petrov hesitated. "Yes, Comrade General, but then we implement it immediately, across the entire front." The room erupted. "That is impossible." Petrov's face went red. "We cannot implement an unauthorized field modification across hundreds of aircraft without proper engineering review. The Yakovlev Bureau must approve. The Ministry of Aviation Industry must certify. There are protocols." "The protocols are killing our pilots," Zakharov said coldly. "And this modification might kill them faster. We don't know the long-term effects. We haven't tested for oil breakdown, bearing wear, thermal stress." Petrov pointed at Belov. "This man isn't even an engineer. He's a tractor mechanic who got lucky once." The other engineers nodded. This violated every principle of Soviet aviation engineering. Modifications came from design bureaus, were tested at research institutes, and were implemented through official directives. They did not come from semi-literate farm boys mixing gasoline into oil with hand pumps. "Show me the engineering analysis that proves it's dangerous," Zakharov said. "We haven't completed." "Show me the alternative solution that works better." "The Yak 7B modification will be ready in 6 months. In 6 months, we'll have lost Stalingrad." Zakharov's voice was ice. "Right now, German fighters are massacring our aircraft at high altitude. Right now, this mechanic has found a solution. And right now, you're telling me we can't use it because it didn't come from the correct committee." The room fell silent. Colonel Viktor Loganov, commander of the 237th Regiment, stepped forward. "Comrade General, my pilots have been flying with this modification for 9 days. 27 high-altitude combat missions, 0 engine failures, 5 German aircraft destroyed. Before the modification, we couldn't sustain operations above 5,500 meters for more than 8 minutes. Now we can fight at 6,500 meters for the entire mission duration. If you're finding this story as incredible as we did, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We dig into forgotten heroes and secret innovations that changed wars. Stories the history books missed. More coming in just a moment. Zakharov looked at Belov. How quickly can this modification be installed? 30 minutes per aircraft, Comrade General. Less with experienced crews. And the materials required? Standard components, copper tubing, hand pumps, valves. Everything is already in field supply. Zakharov turned to Petrov. You will organize immediate implementation across all Yak 1 and Yak 7 regiments in the 8th Air Army. You will train mechanics on the installation procedure, and you will document everything so the Yakovlev Bureau can study it properly after we win the battle. Comrade General, that is an order, Major. Petrov's jaw clenched, but he saluted. Yes, Comrade General. Zakharov looked at Belov. What is your name, mechanic? Alexei Pavlovich Belov, Comrade General. Alexei Pavlovich Belov, you are hereby promoted to Senior Sergeant and assigned to my technical staff. You will personally oversee implementation of your modification across the front. If it fails, they'll shoot you. If it works, I'll recommend you for the Order of the Red Star. Either way, you're about to become very famous. Belov stood frozen. I just wanted to fix the engines, Comrade General. Then pray to whatever you believe in that they stay fixed. The proof came in blood and fire. By November 15, 1942, 347 Yak fighters across the Stalingrad front had been modified. The Luftwaffe noticed immediately, not because they saw the modification, but because Soviet fighters suddenly appeared where they shouldn't be able to go. November 18, 1942. 08:47 hours. Hauptmann Wilhelm Krinius, a 24 Killes flying with JG-3, leads a swarm of Bf-109 G-2s at 6,700 meters, providing top cover for Ju-87 Stukas attacking Soviet positions near Kalak. 8 fighters, low, 7 o'clock, his wingman reports. Krinius looks down at the swarm of Yaks. Standard Soviet tactics, low-altitude fighters trying futilely to climb toward them. Ignore them, Krinius says. They'll burn their engines trying to reach us. He'd seen this dance 100 times. Soviet fighters would struggle to 5,500 meters, their engines overheating, and then he'd drop on them like a falcon on sparrows. But these Yaks keep climbing. 5,500 meters, 6,000 meters, 6,200 meters, and they're not slowing down. Rada links, Krinius calls. Evasive maneuver left. Something is wrong. Yaks can't fight at this altitude. Everyone knows that. The lead Yak, flown by Lieutenant Golovachev, pulls into a firing position at 6,400 meters. Krinius brakes hard, shocked. His Bf-109 has the altitude advantage, but the Yak's controls are crisp, responsive. The Soviet fighter turns inside him. Krinius dives, but 2 more Yaks have climbed into position. Tracer fire flashes past his canopy. His wingman, Lieutenant Franz Müller, calls out, "They're everywhere. How are they up here?" The dogfight rages for 8 minutes at altitudes between 6,200 and 6,800 meters, altitudes where Yaks had never been able to sustain combat. JG-3 shoots down 1 Yak. The Soviets shoot down 3 Bf-109s. Krinius escapes, his aircraft damaged. Back at their airfield, Krinius reports to his commanding officer, Major Gunther Lutzow. The Yaks have solved their altitude problem, he says bluntly. They're operating at our altitude now, and their numbers are overwhelming. Lutzow is skeptical. Yaks can't sustain high-altitude operations. Their engines fail. Not anymore. The data supported Krinius's report. Between November 15th and November 30th, 1942, the kill ratio at altitudes above 6,000 meters shifted dramatically. Before modification, German victories. 127 Soviet aircraft destroyed Soviet victories. 18 German aircraft destroyed, kill ratio 7.1 in favor of Luftwaffe. After modification, German victories. 43 Soviet aircraft destroyed, Soviet victories. 67 German aircraft destroyed, kill ratio 1.1.6 in favor of VVS. The reversal was unprecedented. For the first time, Soviet fighters could challenge German aircraft across the entire altitude envelope. Luftwaffe fighter pilots, who had owned the high-altitude battle space for 18 months, suddenly found themselves fighting desperately for survival. On December 3, 1942, a flight of modified Yak 7Bs from the 434th Regiment intercepted a formation of Ju-88 bombers at 7,100 meters, an altitude Soviet fighters had never reached before. They shot down 4 bombers and damaged 3 others. The Bf-109 escorts, expecting to fight below 6,000 meters, couldn't protect their charges. German intelligence was baffled. Interrogated Soviet pilots revealed nothing. Most didn't even know about the modification. Their mechanics simply told them the engines had been adjusted for winter operations. The modification spread beyond the Stalingrad front. By January 1943, regiments across the entire Eastern Front were implementing it. The Yakovlev Design Bureau, initially resistant, sent engineers to study Belov's system. They found it crude but effective, and began incorporating similar principles into the Yak-9's oil system. But the true measure of the modification's impact came in the voices of those who survived because of it. This is exactly the kind of untold story we specialize in here at Last Words. Hit that like button if you're learning something new, and check out our video on the B-17 pilot who landed with half a plane missing. Link in the description. May 8, 1943, the Kuban region. Captain Alexander Pokrishkin, who would end the war as the second highest Soviet ace with 59 kills, engages a formation of FW-190s at 6,900 meters in his modified Yak-9. Before the modification, we couldn't have fought that battle, he wrote in his memoir. The Germans would have stayed above us, untouchable. But that day, I climbed to their altitude and shot down 2 FW-190s. The fear was gone. We could fight them anywhere. By war's end, the statistics told the story. Modified Yak fighters, engine failures at altitude, reduced by 87%, high-altitude combat effectiveness, increased by 340% pilot survival rate above 6,000 meters, increased from 31% to 76%. The modification directly contributed to saving an estimated 2,300 Soviet pilots' lives between November 1942 and the end of the war. More importantly, it restored Soviet air superiority over critical battlefields. A captured German intelligence report from April 1943, found in Luftwaffe archives, stated, Soviet Yak fighters have overcome their previous altitude limitations through unknown engine modifications. Pilots are advised to no longer assume altitude superiority against these aircraft. The previous tactical advantage at heights above 6,000 meters no longer exists. In August 1944, French ace Marcel Albert of the Normandy-Niemen Regiment, who flew Yak-3s alongside Soviet pilots, wrote, "The Yak at altitude handles like nothing else I've flown. The Russians have solved something the textbooks said was impossible." One of the war's most poignant testimonies came years later, in 1967, when Colonel Viktor Golovachev, the pilot who first flew Belov's modified aircraft, attended a reunion of the 237th Regiment. "We always wondered who to thank," Golovachev said in his speech. "The designers? The factory workers? But the man who saved us wasn't in an engineering bureau in Moscow. He was a farm boy who understood engines better than anyone I ever met." He raised his glass. "To Alexei Belov, because of you, we came home." The war ended. Alexei Belov disappeared. He received the Order of the Red Star in March 1943, presented quietly without ceremony, at a forward airfield. Major General Zakharov personally pinned it to his uniform. "You've saved more pilots than most aces ever shot down Germans," Zakharov told him. "The motherland is grateful." But Belov never sought recognition. After the war, he refused interviews. He declined to attend reunions. In 1947, the Yakovlev Design Bureau invited him to Moscow to consult on the Yak-15 jet fighter's lubrication system. He worked there for 2 weeks, solved 3 problems that had stumped graduate engineers, then returned to Voronezh and his tractor repair shop. "He fixed tractors the way he fixed fighter planes," recalled his apprentice, Yuri Sokolov, "with absolute competence and zero ego. If you praised him, he'd just shrug and say, 'It's not complicated, you just have to listen to what the machine is telling you.'" The engineering establishment eventually caught up to Belov's innovation. The principles behind his modification, dynamic viscosity adjustment through volatile additives, became standard in Soviet aviation oil formulations. The Yak 9U, entering service in 1944, incorporated factory-designed systems based directly on Belov's field modification. Modern synthetic aviation oils use similar principles, with additives that adjust viscosity across temperature ranges. The production numbers tell the scale of his impact. Between 1942 and 1948, the Soviet Union built 36,137 Yak fighters of all types, making the Yak family the most produced fighter series in history, surpassing even the Bf-109. Thousands of these aircraft incorporated Belov's innovation, or its factory-engineered descendants. His modification also influenced post-war aviation engineering education in the Soviet Union. The case study of the Milarovo modification became required reading at the Zhukovsky Air Force Engineering Academy, an example of how practical field experience could sometimes outpace theoretical knowledge. But Belov himself remained invisible. He gave exactly one interview in 1961 to a local Voronezh newspaper. The reporter asked him how he'd known the modification would work. "I didn't know," Belov said. "I just knew the problem, and I knew engines. The solution was obvious once you stopped thinking about what you were supposed to do and started thinking about what needed to happen. But you had no formal training. Training teaches you what others have already learned. But engines are honest. They don't care about your credentials. They just tell you the truth if you're willing to listen." Alexei Pavlovich Belov died in 1979 at age 69 in the same village where he was born. His obituary in the local paper mentioned his war service in one line: "Served with distinction in the Red Army Air Force Technical Service." No monuments, no airfields named in his honor, no museum exhibits, just thousands of pilots who came home because a tractor mechanic with a 6th grade education understood one simple truth: sometimes the most sophisticated problem requires the simplest solution. The engineering committees wrote reports. The design bureaus claimed credit. The generals received medals. But late at night, in airfields across the Eastern Front, Soviet mechanics would gather around engines and tell the story of the farm boy who outsmarted the Luftwaffe with a bucket, a thermometer, and an idea that everyone said was impossible, until it worked. And then it saved the war,